Good morning. It is Tuesday, the 3rd of February. I'm Maeve McMahon and this is Europe Today. Your daily fix of European news and analysis live here on Euronews. Coming up, it is coined the Davos of the Middle East. European leaders and business representatives have flocked to Dubai to discuss trade, AI, geopolitics and more. Some 150 governments are there alongside 500 ministers, all meeting to consider how governments can adapt and innovate in a changing world. Euronews' EU News editor Maria Tadeo is also in Dubai for the occasion and sent us this update.
Good morning indeed. Europe Today on the road, this time from Dubai, where the World Governments Summit, where heads of states, ministers and the private sector will come together to discuss geopolitics, but also trade at a key moment also for this region. I should note two big topics on the agenda. One is Iran. There are expectations that talks will take place between a U.S. delegation and Iranian authorities as soon as this week, potentially restarting talks over a nuclear framework. Remember, President Trump has always said Iran will not have a nuclear weapon and will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. The question in this region, in the UAE, but also the Gulf, is whether or not there can be a diplomatic solution to the tensions that we've seen really kick up because of the protests from the Iranian regime on protesters on the streets of the country, and whether a war, a regional war, can be averted if indeed the U.S. were to use a military strike and military action in the country. That is certainly the big topic permeating this conference. But as I mentioned, the broad region in the Middle East. The other big point, and now connected to the UAE, is Ukraine, because yesterday the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed that a Ukrainian delegation and a Russian delegation will meet in Abu Dhabi to continue talks over whether or not there's a path to end the war. This in a very difficult winter for the Ukrainian people. The temperatures have dropped below 20 degrees. The energy infrastructure has been severely damaged, and you have a country that is quite literally freezing. On that note, very interesting comments from the German Chancellor yesterday, saying that it would be a mistake for the Europeans to re-engage in talks with the Russians because Vladimir Putin has not changed, quote, his maximalist demands and goals when it comes to Ukraine. That is for the politics, but as I mentioned, trade is also very present. This is a region, but also the broader trade picture in 2025 that was shaken by the Liberation Day tariffs from President Trump. Countries are having to adjust. That also goes for the European Union. Remember, the EU since the start of the year has signed two major deals, the Mercosur and India. The question is whether this momentum to create regional trade can continue in an environment that is very complex and difficult when it comes to the geopolitics. On that note, I spoke with the head of the OECD, Matthias Cormann, who told me despite this very difficult backdrop, despite the conflict and the geopolitics right now, trade remains a force for good.
We've had many interviews over the years, but there's one thing you like to repeat, and that is that you believe, you're firmly convinced that trade is a force for good. Is that still the case?
Well, 100%. I mean, the expansion of global trade has been unequivocally a positive for the global economy and for people all around the world. It has helped lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. Of course, I mean, global trade and the global competition that comes with it helps to bring prices down, helps to increase choices for consumers. It helps to drive increased incomes and opportunities for businesses, and hence drive stronger growth and higher incomes and living standards. But it is also true that we always need to think about whether the global markets is well functioning, whether the global rules-based trading system is in good working order. And some issues have been appropriately identified that need addressing, but what we would say is we need to address them in a way that helps preserves the economic benefits of open markets and rules-based trade.
So I wonder, when you look at the EU at this point, what analysis do you make? We've had a very narrative of a declining continent that's almost fallen behind in every possible innovation. Others suggest there's too much doom and gloom. How do you see it?
Well, the way I see it, first and foremost, is that Europe and the European Union as a project is an unequivocal success story. I mean, when you look at the history of Europe as a continent, I mean, by any measure, the last 80 years have been a great success in terms of stability, in terms of peace, in terms of prosperity. I mean, yes, of course, there are challenges. There are things that need to be improved. There are things that Europe needs to reconsider in terms of the approach moving forward.
And that would be what? What do they need to
I mean, I think the conversation that is happening in Europe around making sure that Europe remains internationally competitive, to making sure that Europe is positioned in the best possible way in the geopolitical context as it is evolving. I mean, these are all legitimate conversations, but it's always important not to forget, in thinking about what needs to be improved, not to forget everything that's been achieved. I mean, you look at when I grew up in Belgium, in the 70s and 80s, I wouldn't have been able to just travel to Poland or Hungary or Czechoslovakia as it was then. Now, I mean, all of these countries are successful, thriving, market-based economies, part of the European project. I mean, like Europe today is in a much better place than it has been. But yes, of course, Europe is facing challenges, and Europe needs to continue to think about how best to meet the challenges and how best to pursue the opportunities.
So is there an element of perhaps self-confidence and pride that is lacking for Europeans and they need to regain in a way?
No, I wouldn't make such a blanket statement. I mean, I think Europe fundamentally is a great place to live. It's overwhelmingly a successful continent, and I think we need to put things into perspective. Yes, I mean, there are particular challenges. There are particular challenges at this time. But there are challenges that are long-standing and that are not just unique to Europe, but there are other challenges perhaps where Europe needs to think about how to position itself in the best possible way in the evolving circumstances. But this is, it will always be thus, but there will always be evolving circumstances to which we need to adapt and to which we need to position ourselves in the best possible way.
And when you look at the deals that were cut with both India but also the Mercosur, is that something that you go, that is going in the right step?
The appetite to talk to each other, the appetite to enter into agreements in the last period has actually increased, if anything. And that's also a good thing.
There is, of course, Mario Draghi has come up again with this call to say the European Union needs to move from a sort of confederation that's not really working to a federation. He's also said we need to see radical changes, otherwise it's going to be a slow agony. Is that a message that you can rally behind, and do you understand where he's coming from?
Well, look, I mean, Mario Draghi is an exceptional leader, policy thinker, and I think that everybody would be well advised to listen very carefully to.
So you say listen to his message.
It's not really for me to give advice to the European Union on this point, but when I think that Mario Draghi is somebody that everybody would be very well advised to listen to very carefully.
So what do you expect to see this year now from a global OECD perspective beyond Europe and the United States? What is the outlook that you're hoping to achieve?
Look, I mean, we will have a ministerial council meeting later this year, as we do every year in June. This year, we will be focusing on the interaction between industrial policy and trade policy. How can we ensure that industrial policy is well designed, well targeted, non-market distorting, and helps to achieve policy objectives in a way that doesn't detract from the future expansion of global trade. Really seeking to support countries around the world to manage structural transformations in relation to digital and the green transition, the energy transition, but also really to position themselves in the most competitive, successful way for the future.
And it's not an OECD member, but since you talk about market distortions, is China your biggest worry?
We deal with the global economy, and China is a big factor in the global economy. Obviously, nearly 20% of global economic activity, and there are. Again, there are challenges and opportunities.
Some talk about a big China shock.
Well, there are areas where we're concerned about market destroying practices, about excessive levels of market destroying subsidies, about, and I mean, these are conversations that we need to continue to have. And certainly from our point of view, that we would prefer if there was stronger alignment with, market-based practices like those promoted by the OECD.
Euronews' EU editor there, Maria Tadeo, speaking with Matthias Cormann, the Secretary-General of the OECD, who spoke very highly of Mario Draghi. Well, speaking of Mario Draghi, the former ECB chief took centre stage at the University of Leuven yesterday, where he had a very, very stark message for Europeans. Our Stefan Kobe was listening to that speech and is joining me now in the studio here For a debrief of the speech, Stefan, what else did Mario Draghi have to say?
Yeah, good morning, Maeve. Well, it was Super Mario at his best. Remember, this was the guy in 2012, when he was president of the European Central Bank, single-handedly defended the euro, saved the euro by saying the ECB will do everything whatever it takes to preserve the euro. And that basically put an end to the financial crisis because the bond markets, the financial markets reacted and felt relief. Then in 2024, he published the Draghi, the now famous Draghi report, 400 pages, almost 400 policy recommendations aimed at reversing the trend of a declining Europe and closing the competitiveness gap with China and the US. Now, yesterday in Leuven, he even went further. He made political recommendations that everybody should listen to. Take a listen right now.
Europeans alone have the option to become a genuine power themselves. So we must decide. Do we remain merely a large market subject to the priorities of others? Or do we take the steps necessary to become one power? Grouping together small countries doesn't automatically produce a powerful bloc. This is a future in which Europe risks becoming subordinated, divided, and deindustrialized at once. And a Europe that cannot defend its interests will not preserve its values for long.
Mario Draghi there with a bit of a cold shower this morning, Stefan, for EU leaders. And this speech is well coming at a very difficult time for the EU, just when the transatlantic bond is at a historic low.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Mario Draghi has a tendency of being very parsimonious when it comes to public statements. But whenever there is a public statement, it comes with a big bang. And yesterday's speech was addressed to the audience at Leuven University, but in reality, he was addressing the chancelleries across Europe. Because it so happens that next week, there's going to be an extraordinary EU summit to which Mario Draghi is invited. And he will tell the leaders what they need to do. They need to act to get their act together. Otherwise, will be the lunch of an assertive China and an increasingly aggressive United States under Donald Trump. So Mario Draghi once again has become the oracle of Europe, the elder statesman of Europe, the one that everybody is listening to. And I'm very, very thrilled to see him next week. And let's see what comes out of it.
Indeed, you mentioned that leaders' summit. It'll be a retreat, in fact, taking place on the 12th of February. So we'll keep a very close eye on that, Stefan Kobe. Thank you so much for that update. But now, moving on, France is making the headlines this morning for having finally finalised its budget for 2026. After months of political deadlock, Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu had to use his constitutional provision to force it through and managed to survive not one, but two no confidence votes to do so. The budget includes big plans for military spending in France. For more, we can head over to Paris and bring in our correspondent, Sofia Kaskinkova. Good morning, Sophia. So this vote brings an end to months of political deadlock in France. Just give us the context here.
Yes, good morning, May, from rainy Paris. So, as you said, after a long and often bitter standoff in a deeply divided parliament, just where I am standing, the government finally secured the adoption of the long overdue 2026 budget on Monday evening. Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu chose to bypass a vote by MPs by invoking Article 49.3, which is a constitutional tool that lets him do this. And this opened the floor up to two no-confidence motions, one from the far right and another one tabled by the left, excluding the moderate socialists. And so Lecornu survived both last night, allowing the budget to pass. And so the budget itself aims to reduce the ballooning public deficit of Europe's second largest economy to 5% of GDP this year from 5.4% of GDP last year. Shortly after the vote, Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu welcomed this outcome on social media. He tweeted, and I quote, "France finally has a budget that embraces clear choices and essential priorities, a budget that reins in public spending, which does not raise taxes for households and businesses. This text is not the government's text. It is the result of a parliamentary compromise incorporating amendments from all groups." And he also added that he will be referring the text to the Constitutional Council in the next few days to make sure that it fully complies with the country's constitution. Back to you, Brussels.
So, Sophia, what does this all mean now for France? And of course the EU, because this has been watched very carefully from Brussels.
So for France, this brings some immediate relief, but that doesn't mean a long-term stability, Maeve. The country, yes, now has a budget giving clarity for markets and public services, but the way it was passed just shows how fragile the political system in France has become. As a reminder, Lecornu is now the fourth prime minister in just 2 years for French President Emmanuel Macron, and he has survived not just 2 no-confidence votes last night, but in total 8 no-confidence votes from both the left and the far right in these past few weeks. And to stay in office this time, he had to make a lot of concessions, especially for the socialists, most notably suspending President Emmanuel Macron's unpopular pension reform plan that would have raised the retirement age from 62 to 64 years old. And as you said, for the EU, the stakes are really high. France has been under growing pressure from Brussels and credit rating agencies to control its debt. So passing this budget signals that Paris can deliver some sort of fiscal discipline, but it also raises questions about how sustainable that discipline will be as France heads towards another crucial electoral cycle, which are the presidential elections in just 1 year.
Indeed, we'll be gripped to France. Sofia Kacinkova, and you'll of course be reporting it all for us here on Euronews. Thank you so much for that live update on a story that we've been, quite frankly, been watching for weeks. And here's another. The value of gold took a nosedive last week, and silver too. While prices tumbled, Europeans keep buying though, and in huge quantities, as our Jakob Yanis reports.
Have you seen this shiny metal recently? After hitting a record high, gold plummeted, losing over 15% of its value. And silver went even worse, crashing over 30%. Ouch! So what caused the crash? Markets are reacting to Trump's latest nomination for the Federal Reserve, sparking fears that interest rates might stay higher for longer. But despite this crash, Europe is still hoarding gold. But why? Let's start with central banks. They buy gold to reduce reliance on the US dollar and to stabilize national economies. And they buy a lot. Take Portugal as an example. They hold almost 400 tons, which historically is a legacy of selling raw materials to Nazi Germany in exchange for gold. Then there is Poland. With Russia's war in Ukraine, they've been on a buying spree, now holding 550 tons. That is already more than the European Central Bank itself. And finally, Germany. They own over 3,000 tons, but with a big number of it sitting in New York. And with Trump back in power, German politicians are demanding, bring our gold home. And that's Europe. But what about Europeans? Gold is seen as a shield protecting your savings when the value of paper money becomes worth less over time. Do you remember when your espresso cost you €1? Good luck buying one now for this price in Brussels. But as we've seen in the recent days, it doesn't always have the Midas touch to your portfolio. So why does your reporter buy gold? Because even if its price falls down, I still have something shiny to play with, as opposed to crypto.
Check up Yanis reporting there on the value of gold and silver that investors ensured would bounce back in a slightly recover and is in fact slightly recovering this morning. But what about you? Have you lost faith in paper money and are you hedging your bets on gold? Drop us a line here at europetoday@euronews.com. But that does bring this edition of Europe Today to a close. Join us again tomorrow, Wednesday. We'll be joined in the studio by the Moldovan Foreign Minister. Thanks so much for your company. Take care and see you soon on Euronews.